Hey there, welcome to the show. Today, I have a very special guest to talk to us about sleep, something that is hard to come by in our perimenopausal years, especially. So, Morgan Adams is a transformative holistic sleep coach who empowers women to conquer their battle with sleepless nights without reliance on sleep medications. With her powerful sleep toolkit, Morgan not only ensures that women experience a profound enhancement in their sleep quality, but she also guides them in rekindling their relationship with sleep, paving the way for less stressful and more fulfilling days. Having struggled with insomnia and dependency on prescription sleeping pills for almost a decade, Morgan intimately understands the profound impact sleep has on one's quality of life. Morgan's resilience shines bright as a two-time breast cancer survivor. This experience fueled her advocacy for a lifestyle rooted in disease prevention. Her wisdom and guidance extend far beyond just sleep as she champions holistic well-being in all aspects of life. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm so excited to connect with you today.
I'm so glad you're here.
Yay.
All right. Well, I have a bunch of questions for you, so we're just going to dive right
All
in.
right.
Cool. All right. So let's start with the basics. Why is sleep so important and what are its benefits?
Yes. So we kind of have looked at sleep as among the three pillars of health, kind of alongside movement and nutrition. And if you're doing research on all three, you're going to find a lot more things on Google with nutrition and movement because those have been kind of like the top bill. And I feel like sleep has sort of been what I call like the redheaded stepchild of the trio. And it shouldn't be. I feel personally, and yes, I am biased, that it is sort of the foundation upon which the other pillars are built. And so my job is to kind of be a better PR agent for sleep. So if you think about wanting to eat healthfully, you're going to have a hard time doing that if you are sleep deprived. Same thing for movement. If you are sleep deprived, you're probably not going to want to take your yoga class or do your bike ride. So it's really the pillar of health from where I stand. And it affects everything, really. There's no area that sleep doesn't touch. So it spans from our cardiovascular health to our hormone balance to injury recovery and repair to emotional regulation to solidifying memories and helping us learn. So it touches on so many levels that if sleep starts to go, you are going to notice sort of a domino effect in other areas of your life. So very, very important thing to talk about.
Yes, 100% yes. I struggled with sleep a long time years ago. And then in my late 30s, as I started my perimenopausal journey, and I was like, oh, no, 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 no. We need to get on top of this. So, on that note, why do so many women in midlife, which is really 40s and beyond, suffer from poor sleep?
Yeah, there are a few main reasons that I would like to call out. So the first one is kind of obvious. It's hormone fluctuations and dips, and hormones are kind of all over the place during this part of our lives. The second thing is mental health issues, specifically anxiety and depression, tend to sort of peak around midlife. And when you have anxiety and depression, that leaves you more vulnerable to sleep issues. And then I think the third reason is really more of a societal roles type of scenario. So picture a woman who's 45, maybe 45, late 40s, and she's got children at home that she's responsible for. She's got maybe aging parents that she actually needs to help out. And then with her career, she could potentially be at the top of her career game, in a CEO role or running her own business, being an entrepreneur. So all of those demands start to kind of become competing in a sense. And you may have heard the term the sandwich generation. That's kind of
Mhm.
how I feel, how I look at it is there's so many things calling our attention. And it creates a lot of stress and anxiety as a result. So when you think about all of those factors at play, you can kind of imagine how sleep can get impacted for us.
Yes, absolutely. And that's like most of my clients, I would say. They're dealing with
Yes,
just so much. And
I'm
like you
sure.
said, a lot of them are at the top of their game and their career or their business. And then they've just got, their kids, the kids are going off to college, or they've got aging parents, and it's a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, all right, let's move on to something that I feel like a lot of people talk about, especially on social media, the idea of having routine, whether that's morning or evening or both. How important is it to have a morning and evening routine when it comes to sleep?
Yeah, I think it's critical to have both and to solidify both. So there's a quote from Louise Hay, how you start your day is how you live your day. And so really good sleep begins the moment your feet hit the ground in the morning. And we all have different things going on in the mornings. Like, people who have young kids, they have a different type of life than maybe someone who's older and doesn't have kids, and maybe they're not working. So we all have different morning types of scenarios happening. But I think no matter what your morning looks like, you need to have something that you can turn to that is grounding and gives you some sort of intentionality about your morning. And it could mean many things. It could mean meditating, it could mean breath work, journaling, it could mean prayer, so many things. But just even if it's 5 minutes, just having that thing that you rely on morning after morning to kind of center yourself and I think it also buffers that stress from kind of happening throughout the day. So if you can kind of start the day on a kind of a non-stressful note, I think it really makes a huge difference. And then evening routines, I'm a huge proponent of too. And there are tons of things that you can do for your evening routine. I recommend that people start about an hour before they plan to go to bed. But let's be realistic. Sometimes life gets in the way. People need you, and you may not have 30 minutes. Take the 30 minutes, but
Mhm.
an hour is like very ideal. And there's so many things that you can do for your evening routine. It is incredibly personal. So just some common things would be like, again, kind of similar to things that happen in the morning, the meditating, the journaling, maybe gentle yoga, listening to podcasts. And you may laugh, but I actually watch TV at night
Yeah.
before I go to bed. Some people are
Sometimes I
like,
do too.
wait a minute, you're a sleep coach? Isn't
Yeah.
that bad? But it actually, I find it very relaxing.
Mm.
And it works for me because I've got on my blue blocking
Mhm.
glasses. So I'm blocking that blue light. I'm watching shows that are not stimulating or scary or news related. They're very, kind of vanilla content. And I'm watching on a regular TV. So it's a fair distance from my eyes. But you have to kind of find what works for you. And I do have a free mini course that kind of walks you through this. And it's for
Mhm.
people who really kind of don't have much of a routine and kind of want to get a head start on getting it built for themselves.
Mhm. I love that. Okay, and we'll
Yeah.
we'll link to that in the show notes, the free course. I like what you said about finding what works for you, because I feel like there's a lot of like rules and black and white thinking, especially in the health and wellness space. And some things may not be relaxing to certain people. And I get it. And like right now we're watching a show, and there are some nights where we do watch TV. But I do try to give myself like half hour or so to kind of wind down and do whatever it is and whatever I feel like that night. Sometimes it's sitting in front of the red light, sometimes it's reading, sometimes it's journaling. So I love that, the idea of finding what works for you.
Yeah. And I think that to your point, like you need to be flexible. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing every night. What I really try to steer people away from, especially my clients with insomnia, is having a rigidity.
Hmm.
Because with people who have insomnia and sleep anxiety, they don't need more assignments. They don't need more pressure to do X, Y, and Z at a certain time. But it's good to have kind of like almost like a little menu of things you could opt from and then kind of pick accordingly to what kind of vibe you're in
Hmm.
that evening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. So let's move on to sleeping pills, because you said that you depended on them for a while. So like, what are your thoughts on that? What was your experience and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So my experience was not good. I was on them for about 8 years and I started taking them because I had trouble falling to sleep, which is technically called sleep onset insomnia. I would lie there for maybe an hour, 2 hours most nights. And I reached the point where I was like, this enough is enough. I need to get help. And so I went to my primary care doctor and he prescribed me Ambien. And at this stage of my life, I was actually a pharmaceutical sales rep. So the idea of taking a pill was just like every day to me. I mean, like, pills were everywhere in my world. So taking one was no biggie. And, the pill did actually help me get to sleep a little bit more quickly. But, if you understand sleeping pills, what often happens is you kind of forget you're awake. And the quality of your sleep is not very good. You actually don't move into the proper stages of sleep at the proper times. You can have impacts on your sleep stages. You may not get as much REM or as much deep. And then the main problem was the next day. It was dreadful as far as the brain fog and the grogginess. I didn't actually feel fully alert most days until like lunchtime. So it wasn't a good experience, but now that I've kind of gotten some distance from it, I do see the use case for them. And really, they are meant for short-term use. When you look at the package insert, it says clearly they're not meant to be used over like 4 weeks. So, and like me, I was using them for 8 years. And I have clients who've been using them for 10, 15 plus years. So primary care doctors, I should specify primary care because unfortunately the general physicians out there in primary care have only had about 2 hours of sleep science education. So when you approach your doctor with insomnia, they're likely going to either give you a prescription for a sleeping pill and or just a list of sleep hygiene, which are, not terribly effective with insomnia. So the real use case is in a crisis situation for a temporary period of time. So you've had a death in the family, a divorce, a job loss, something very crisis related that you need sleep and you need it now. But the doctor really should be providing you with some kind of exit strategy for how you'll get off the pill. But instead, unfortunately, they just keep giving you refill after refill till one day you're like, I've been on these for 10 years and I'd really like to not have to use them. And as far as the efficacy of sleeping pills, they're not really as effective as we've been made to believe. So back in 2021, they did a study looking at women in midlife, actually, early 40s to mid 50s. And they found that after 1 to 2 years of consistent use with sleeping pills, their sleep actually wasn't statistically significantly better than without the pills.
Wow.
So it's really not giving people the true quality of sleep that they need to kind of do the brain cleansing and to really give their body a chance to repair and their brains a chance to cleanse overnight. So it's problematic, but they can be useful for those certain times of a crisis.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I agree with you. I mean, we have medication for a reason. And there are instances where it is needed. But like you said, a lot of people don't realize how long they should be taking these things. Nobody's really giving them that education. And I imagine you become quite dependent on them. Um, so can you talk a little bit about how you kind of came off of them or?
Sure. Well, so I came off of them during a time when I was starting to date my current husband. And he would observe how I would act after I took the pills. And he said to me one night, like, yeah, you kind of become like a zombie after you take the pill. And it kind of freaks me out. And I was like, wow, he's right. Like, because you do sort of become, it's like you do become like sort of like a different person. You're just kind of checked out. You're kind of just blank because you're heavily sedated. So what I did was I started to cut down the pills, taper them down with a pill cutter. And that is actually the correct way to do it. However, when you are coming off a medication, especially a psychiatric medication, you really need to consult your prescribing provider because they will give you some kind of direction on the proper taper schedule so that it's slow enough for you. And it's also helpful to join forces with a sleep coach because we can help you gain the sleep confidence so that you feel better getting off the pills and you have that accountability. but sleep coaches didn't exist back then, or at least
Right.
I didn't know about them.
Hmm.
And so I just, I did it the wrong way to an extent, but I was lucky in that I managed to get off of them without really too much of a problem. So that is really kind of my experience with the sleeping pills.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of stories of people coming off psychiatric meds and their doctors don't even tell them how to taper, and it could be
Mm.
really dangerous. So,
Yeah.
if anybody's listening, if you're on some sort of medication, make sure you advocate for yourself and tell your doctor, I want to be tapered off properly. And, like
Yes.
Morgan said, if anything, work with the coach as well to get that confidence, to get the guidance and the education. Okay, so you have mentioned the term insomnia a few times. Can you tell us a little
Yeah.
bit more, like what exactly is insomnia? And of course, how can it be addressed?
Yeah. So insomnia is technically defined as having trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early at least 3 days a week.
Wow.
And it would be considered chronic if it was happening 3 months or longer. So anything under 3 months is considered acute. And then there's also a caveat within that definition. And the other caveat is that the person experiencing these problems with sleep has to have some kind of daytime functioning problem. They have to feel some kind of distress, or it has to affect their daytime. So that is really the technical definition. And so a lot of people over time, over their lifetimes, will experience acute insomnia due to a shakeup in their life. And fortunately, most people sort of get themselves out of it just kind of naturally. But when it becomes chronic after 3 months, and that's kind of a ballpark time, but it really kind of takes on a life of its own. And what we really find is that the person dealing with the insomnia can develop a lot of sleep anxiety. They can develop something called conditioned arousal, hyperarousal, which is basically like when you're in fight or flight. So a lot of times people that I work with will come to me because they are scared of going to bed. They're like, they think about their bedroom as almost like a battleground, and they don't have they don't have a healthy relationship with their sleep. So part of healing from insomnia entails building up that relationship with sleep so that it's at least neutral, you know,
Mhm.
um, and also just giving people more self-confidence in their ability to sleep. So there are a few ways that I work in my practice as a holistic sleep coach on doing this. Um, the key way, and really the most evidence-based way, if you will, of doing this is called CBTI,
Mhm.
cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. It's been around since the 1980s, and it is sort of like the gold standard treatment for insomnia over sleeping pills because there are really no side effects, and the results are long lasting. So it really involves changing people's behaviors around sleep.
Mhm.
So we may be changing your wake time. We may be kind of shortening your sleep window to consolidate that sleep and make it more high quality. And it also involves changing your behaviors, thoughts, and attitudes about sleep,
Mhm.
because those are super important. So if you have a terrible attitude and terrible mindset about sleep, and it's really hard to move forward and make progress in your sleeping journey. I also take into account a lot of circadian practices to help people strengthen their circadian rhythm, because what I'm finding is that a lot of people that come to me have really dysregulated circadian rhythms. So we work a lot on getting a routine going, getting sunlight in the morning,
Mhm.
having a really regular wake up time, having regular meal times. So those can really help as well. What we've also been finding is that not only are these circadian health practices helping people with their sleep, but it's helping them with their overall health and mood.
Yes.
So it's really quite fascinating to see it kind of play out in real time. So that is really the way that I work with clients on helping them heal insomnia. And one of the questions I get a lot is, well, how long does it take? And
Mhm.
that's a question I can never really answer
Yeah.
because it depends on each person.
Mhm.
Because some people, they're kind of a quick study. They take to things really quickly. They adopt the practices, and they get better very quickly. Other people, it takes them a little bit longer to kind of really internalize kind of what's going on. So it's always a hard question to answer. And we don't want to ever, if we're going through insomnia, we don't want to put pressure on ourselves to reach a goal by a certain date, because that just adds more pressure to what's going on.
Yes, and I would say that that is true for most things with health. We can't really put a timeline on it. It's unfortunate that nowadays there is so much of the quick fix thinking and people wanting things done really in a very quick manner. We say the same to our clients, like, listen, we hope that you start to feel better soon with the things that we, recommend you implement. But, it's up to, there's many different factors. And I would imagine that mindset plays a big role. You mentioned like even just their thoughts around sleep and kind of like unlearning things and retraining how you think. I mean, that can't be an easy feat.
Yeah, exactly. And so many people come to me with a real, they feel very scared about their health
Mm,
because they've heard these rumors and these myths, if you don't get 8 hours of sleep, bad things are going to happen. And
mhm,
we really have to unpack that and kind of bust the myth that there's this myth about 8 hours of sleep. And really,
mhm,
that's not true for a lot of people. The National Sleep Foundation recommends 7 to 9 hours for adults 18 to 64. But if you read their fine print of those recommendations, you'll see that they say between 6 and 10 hours is appropriate for some people. So
mhm,
there are certain people that I've worked with who, think that they need 8 hours, but they come out of the coaching, after several weeks, they're really doing well with 7 hours,
mhm.
and so they're just pleasantly surprised. And a lot of times people come to me thinking that they're going to have some kind of terrible health consequence from insomnia, or they might die. And
Right.
those claims are quite overblown. There's really no
Mhm.
indication at all. If you look at the top 10 causes of death in the world or the country, insomnia isn't on that list.
Right.
So what they're
Mhm,
seeing, unfortunately, is they're seeing the scary headlines that are pointing to studies dealing with sleep deprivation, which is
mhm,
different from insomnia. And with these studies, quite often they are not well controlled, and they are kind of leading people to the wrong conclusions. So the person who has insomnia shouldn't really be looking at those studies because they don't really apply to them, because they're
mhm,
looking at sleep deprivation. They're also looking at
mhm,
correlational data, and that's not causation data.
mhm.
So, we're never going to really have a perfect insomnia study at all. So people are best served to kind of relax a little bit about the health implications, because worrying about that just kind of adds fuel to the fire.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes the worry is worse. I say that when it comes to food. Again,
Yes.
especially in the health space, there's so much black and white thinking around diet and, how much protein to get and you should count macros and all this. And some women, I just find they get very stressed about it. And we're like, we need to
Yes.
just take a breather. let's
Yes.
let's let's focus on some nervous system support. So I want to expand upon this a little bit because you just were talking about like the hours of sleep. So when it comes to that, like what is more important? Quality versus quantity. I'm gonna assume you're gonna say quality, but I do want to talk a little bit more about that because so many people think I should be getting X amount of hours. And even I have thought about that in the past where I would wake up and, we could talk about tracking in a bit, but I would notice like, oh, I only got 6.5. And then I'm like, ugh. But then I realized like, but I actually feel pretty good. And then sometimes those are like some of my most productive days. So I'm like, well, I guess it's not really hurting me. So let's talk about
Yes.
that.
I've noticed the exact same thing with my sleep. So there has been a recent, I guess, way to look at sleep presented by Dr. Matthew Walker, who's a very well-known sleep scientist who wrote the book Why We Sleep. And he's developed an acronym called QQRT. And I really like to point this out. He called it sort of the macros of sleep, which I think is kind of cool because, your audience is going to understand what macros are. I don't think we need to explain that. But so the first Q is quantity. So
Mhm,
that's addressing the 7 to 9 hours. Quality is really more about like if you're getting the proper amount of deep sleep, the proper amount of REM sleep. And then R with the QQRT, R is regularity. And so what we're finding is that the regularity and consistency of people's sleep is very, very key in their health outcomes. There was a study done recently where they looked at thousands of people, longitudinal study, and they found lower mortality rates for people who have consistent 6 hours versus a regular 8 hours.
Wow.
So I think that what we're going to start to see in public health messaging soon is more attention on the regularity and the consistency of that sleep.
Mm.
And then the T in that acronym is timing. And that's really about your chronotype. Are you a morning lark? Are you a night owl? And are you kind of living your life according to your chronotype? So they're all different variables there at play when you're looking at sort of your sleep health. So it's just so much more about the number. And you're so right. I mean, I've noticed myself with my Oura Ring, some days I'll get like 6.5 hours of sleep, but I feel so good. And then other days I get 8 and I'm just like dragging. So it's just so much more about the quantity.
Yeah. Are you able to speak a little bit more on chronotype or how to find out like what your chronotype is?
Yeah. So chronotype is really sort of, in a nutshell, are you a morning lark or are you a night owl?
Mm.
Or are you something in between? So I would say probably like 20% or true morning larks, 20 to 25%, and then 20 to 25% they say are more night owls. And then the rest of the people are sort of in the middle, kind of an intermediate chronotype. And there, I don't know the exact gene, but there are genes that sort of dictate your chronotype. Like if you've ever done 23andMe, you can kind of research that. But one of the ways I work with my clients on finding their chronotype is a very simple online kind of test, if you will, called it's a long word, morningness, eveningness questionnaire. Morningness, eveningness questionnaire. It's a tongue twister, but it's called MEQ. So if you Google MEQ chronotype, you'll see this quiz online that consists of several questions. And then based on how you answer the questions, it'll sort of feed back to you what your chronotype is. But I think most people kind of know their chronotype. They kind of understand. And an interesting thing about chronotypes is that they do tend to shift a little bit over time. So as we get into our 50s and 60s, what we often find is that people shift over into an earlier chronotype.
Right.
And I even like kind of found this interesting with my own sleep. I have an Oura Ring and I've been using it since 2020. The other day, I was just kind of looking at longitudinal data for myself. And you can see that my bedtime is getting earlier and earlier over the 4 years.
Hmm.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is it going to be like when I'm 60? Like this is going to be
Right.
kind of scary because I'm a very strong early bird chronotype and I
Hmm.
always have been. Um, but yeah, what we, and it's kind of funny because you think of the older folks at the restaurant at 4 or 5 at the early bird
Hmm.
special. It's because they're starting to get wired to be an earlier chronotype.
Yeah.
But then there's been, kind of on a different note with chronotypes, there's been talk recently in the sleep field about, are people actually night owls? Like,
Mm.
because if you think about the way that our modern life is, people are using inappropriate lighting at night, they're drinking caffeine, into the evening. So they're doing all of these things that essentially kind of rev them up
Hmm.
so that they think they're a night owl because they're doing these things. But if you actually strip them of all those things, and they've done studies like this where they take people camping for a week and there's no artificial light, what they find is that a lot of the people who are quote night owls don't end up as night owls after the camping trip because they've kind of retrained their circadian rhythm. But there is nuance to that because I do know a couple people who are very, like, one of them is a sleep doctor actually who is on Instagram with us, and she is truly a night owl. I mean, she's got amazing circadian practices, but she doesn't really go to sleep until past midnight, maybe two
Wow.
o'clock. But I think that's probably a smaller portion of our population.
Hmm.
So it's an interesting dialogue to see kind of how the chronotype is playing out in terms of, like, are they really as legit as we thought they were? So I think
Hmm.
time is going to tell with that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. So something that comes up quite a bit, I notice with women in their perimenopausal years and beyond, is middle of the night wake ups. So what causes them, and what can you do about them?
Yeah, it's a huge issue. It's probably the biggest issue that I find with people. So, first of all, I want to normalize that it is completely natural, normal, acceptable to have a middle of the night awakening. As we move through our sleep stages during the night, we I'll often wake up at the end of a sleep cycle as just part of the normal structure. And they've said that it is more along the lines of a safety feature that we have, where we wake up briefly, we scan for our safety, we scan our surroundings for safety, and then we go right back to sleep. So if you're awake for like maybe 3 minutes, you're not going to remember that awakening. So that's not going to even really quote count. But the problem is when people wake up and they start worrying about either stuff in their life going on, stressors in their world, or they're worrying about the fact that they're awake. And so what we notice is that when we have those awakenings and we can't get back to sleep, we start to catastrophize. So our prefrontal cortex is not totally online at that time of night. So we're really operating from our irrational, more emotional part of our brain. So, I mean, I've noticed with myself, if I do wake up in the middle of the night and can't fall asleep, gosh, my mind goes to dark places. My mind goes to some strange places. And then
Right.
I'll wake up the next morning and I'll be like, I woke up and I was thinking about this. And that's kind of crazy talk, um, so let's talk about some of the other reasons other than just the natural awakening after a sleep cycle. So the top three that I'm finding with my clients, in no particular order really, are blood sugar dips. So blood sugar is crashing, and then we have this cortisol spike, which kind of rouses us to wake up. And in those situations, what I always recommend is for people to focus in on balancing their blood sugar throughout the day. And this is probably your wheelhouse, so you chime in at any point. But starting off with that high protein breakfast, having a balanced plate, have a healthy fat at every meal, and even sometimes with people having a very small snack before they go to bed can be helpful. And the small snack, I'm not talking about, cookies and ice cream. I'm talking about like,
Right.
a little Greek yogurt with some almonds, or maybe even, a few spoonfuls of your leftovers from dinner. So that's one area, wake ups being the blood sugar spike, sorry, the dips, excuse me. The second area that I see is people being too hot. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are having a hot flash or a night sweat, but they're just sleeping hot. And so they may not even realize that they're waking up for that reason. So sort of the fixes for that, there are many, but starting off with cooling sheets, like bamboo fabric sheets tend to be a lot more cooling. Bamboo fabric for your bed, for your pajamas or your nightgown is often good. And then I'm a huge fan of the cooling mattress pads. That has been like legitimately a game changer for me for the past 2 years, because you can make it quite cool if you want at night, and it can prevent you from getting overheated. And I know that it works because when I go on vacation and I'm in an Airbnb, I'm always waking up hot. And I'm like, oh, I miss my mattress pad. And then the third reason that I see quite often is sleep breathing disorders. In other words, sleep apnea or upper airway resistance syndrome. This is quite common. And when we become in our midlife and beyond, it becomes even more prevalent, because as we lose our estrogen and progesterone, those are protective of our airways. So as those hormones decline, we may notice some breathing irregularities. And when women become in their midlife years, their sleep apnea incidence basically matches those of their male counterparts in the same age bracket. So like before midlife, it tends to be predominantly men, overweight men, kind of that Homer Simpson prototype that the snoring on the sofa. But I've worked with several women, I mean, even as young as in their 30s, who have sleep breathing issues and need to have that addressed. So it's often a hard pill for people to swallow, because they look at themselves as like, I'm fit, I'm healthy, but I mean, I was just diagnosed with mild sleep apnea.
Right. Yeah.
When I'm fit and healthy and doing all the right things, and it's kind of a blow, because it's just part of, sometimes the hormone decline. It can be part of just the structure of your airway, having a narrow jaw. But it is important, though, if you are waking up several times a night, especially to have to go pee, if your bed partner reports, some gasping, some snoring, that's definitely a sign to get tested. It's, so for women who don't have a bed partner, it's even more important that they pay attention. And there's an app called Snore Lab that a lot of people use. They set it up by their bed, and that way they can kind of like record their night and identify some snoring that's happening. People who feel a lot of sleepiness during the day or fatigue despite having like the proper amount of sleep. Basically what's happening when you have sleep apnea is you're having sort of like mini strokes and heart attacks during the night. You're just not able to get enough air, and that impacts your, functioning during the day and can set you up for metabolic and cardiovascular issues later on. Not to scare people, but it's something that really should be brought to people's attention. And there's ways to get tested at home, ordering a sleep study from your home. You don't have to actually contact a physician if you don't want to. They've got, direct to consumer options. So they're making it more and more accessible for people to do by themselves without having to intervene with insurance, which is nice.
Yeah, thank you for speaking on all that. And those are all so important to think about. That when you said bamboo sheets, I wanted to laugh because I was looking at Amazon earlier for bamboo sheets because I'm like, we need more cooling sheets, babe. Like,
Oh, well,
because it's hot.
let me recommend Cozy Earth to you.
Cozy Earth. Okay.
Yes, I am affiliated, but I'm only
Okay.
affiliated because I think they're the bomb. They're
Mm-hmm.
so good. They're so
Okay.
silky. I mean, my husband and I had pretty high-end bamboo-ish sheets a while ago, and I took the plunge with the Cozy Earth, and we were like, is this going to be worth it? Like, we were just kind of like, are we suckers? And like literally for a week solid, we were like oohing and eyeing about it. Like we were just nerding out
Yeah.
completely over the difference. So highly
Thank you.
recommend.
Yeah, I'm gonna check those out. Yeah, because I know even like sometimes you look on Amazon, you're like, well, they look good, but I don't know.
Yeah.
We're all about, obviously we can do it and it's nice that we can, but investing in certain things like sleep, our mattress, bedding, it's really
Yes.
important to us because when we don't sleep well, it's nobody's happy.
I know. I'm
So,
with you. And it's interesting because I see people spending so much money on their sofas, a leather
mhm.
sofa. Like you're better off suited to spend that money on a really high quality mattress or
Yep.
bedding, because it's going to make such a difference. So I'm
Yes.
glad that glad that you're prioritizing your sleeping dollars there.
Yes. Yeah. And even like pajamas and yeah, I'm all about it because I know what it's like to not sleep. I mean, for
Yeah.
years I struggled with it. I mean, that was in my 20s. And then, like I said, again, in my late 30s when things started to shift with my hormones, but knock on wood, now I'm sleeping pretty great, but we could
Excellent.
definitely upgrade our sheets. And then you mentioned something that a lot of women we say this to our clients as well about the blood sugar dips and having sometimes a snack at night because there are so many people who think that they should be fasting for X amount of time and they could be really rigid with that. But when we notice that somebody is doing all the things right and they're still struggling, that we will suggest that they have a snack at night and tell them what kind of snack. Obviously, like you said, not ice cream or cookies, but and I myself sometimes need to have a snack at night, especially if maybe I didn't hit, the protein that I needed to during the day. And I try not to have any judgment around it, especially if I'm feeling a little hungry. I'm like, well, this is not going to go well if I go to bed
Right.
hungry. So,
Exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
it's sort of a case by case basis. And I think that you make a great point not to be dictated by rigidity of, a fasting schedule.
Hmm.
Because I think, ultimately you have to make that judgment call. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of people are going to make the judgment call of, I want to sleep well tonight. If that means I break my fast, well, then so be it.
exactly. Yeah. And then also thank you for speaking on sleep apnea because I get it. A lot of women, they don't even want to hear that. And we have actually suggested that to several of our clients. Again, we're working with women who are in their perimenopausal years, but we even have some women in their mid or early 30s. And one recently I suggested her to learn more about it. And we do provide a resource on it just because like I have seen it even with my own family members. Like I have a sister who's in her 40s and like you, she was diagnosed with mild sleep apnea because for years she struggled and she was doing all the things right. It was like, okay, it's time to look into like a sleep study. And a lot of people I think believe that they have to wear like these big contraptions at night. And I think you spoke
Yes.
about this today on your
Oh,
Instagram story.
yeah.
And that
Yeah.
wasn't the case for her. She was able to do something different and she has seen an improvement. So ladies, don't ignore this stuff. Don't be be in denial. If you need to get tested, just do what you have to do.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
advice. And yeah, there's so many different options these days, aside from the CPAP machine. There's oral appliances.
Mhm.
They have these things like their tongue trainers. There's implants. I mean, I think
Wow.
the field of sleep apnea is probably the biggest field of sleep
Mhm.
because there's so many people dealing with sleep apnea, and the
Wow.
market is demanding better solutions.
Mhm.
So, stay tuned for more,
Yeah,
coming years.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So we talked a bit about tracking our sleep, and I'm wearing an Aura ring. I think you're wearing one. You mentioned it. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about sleep trackers and what are your thoughts on them?
I'm a fan of sleep trackers for the right person.
Mm,
So if you are a pretty decent sleeper, or if you're kind of like, I want to kind of boost it a notch, I want to optimize it, I think a sleep tracker is a great tool for that, especially if you're the kind of person who's able to look at the data that you get from your dashboard and identify behavioral patterns that you feel like could be contributing to some of the issues.
mm,
So for me, for example, I've had this for 4 years, the Aura Ring, and I've noticed that, over time, if I drink too much alcohol too late, it's a disaster with my sleep
mm,
score and my readiness score. So I've actually been able to use that data to do behavioral modification with my drinking frequency and amount
mhm,
so that I can, not just get a better score for the sake of getting a better score, but actually feel better the next day.
mm,
So I think it's a great use case for people like that. Where we get into a little bit of a sticky situation is when people have either insomnia or a lot of sleep anxiety, where they're just kind of fixated on their data and they're like waking up every day, immediately looking at their data and stressing out about
mm,
like, oh, I didn't get enough REM, I didn't get enough deep. What we find is that it can actually exacerbate sleeping problems because the anxiety doesn't help your sleep. So
mm,
when I work with clients who come to me with a sleep tracker, I will say, look, let's just put your sleep tracker, on a pause for a while and work on your sleep, and then revisit looking at your sleep tracker later. And then another potential way to use a sleep tracker for people who are kind of teeter-tottering in the middle of like they're kind of almost a little bit too obsessed, but they still want to see the data, is looking at it once a week. So like wearing it every night, the data gets downloaded, and then once a week, on the weekend, maybe you just
mm,
kind of look at your trend to see where you are versus kind of being shocked every morning by the headlines. And they've done studies where they basically show that people almost have like a self-fulfilling prophecy when they're told,
mhm.
like if they've slept well, for example, and they were told you didn't get a good score, their performance may be lessened because of that news that they got.
Wow.
So it almost does become like a self-fulfilling prophecy when we see the data.
Mhm. That's a great idea on taking a break, maybe not looking every day, maybe just looking like on the weekends. I may
Yeah.
take that advice,
Yeah.
especially for like my steps. And lately we've
Yeah.
had some stress, but yeah, I've been getting,
Yeah.
like I said, less sleep and just like kind of having some judgment around it. And I have to just be
Yeah.
okay with it because life happens. We have stress. There's a lot going on. We have aging parents. We have sick dogs. We have kids, all that. And getting some sleep, I think, is better than none. So let's try not
Yeah.
to have so much judgment around it.
Yeah. I think you make a good point. Let's just like be a little bit more relaxed about it and not be as harsh, and lean into more of the self-acceptance and
Hmm.
realize that life brings us these challenges like you were just explaining, and maybe our sleep takes a hit, but it's
Yeah.
really sort of a chapter in time. This is not the way it's going to be forever indefinitely, and giving
Right.
yourself grace, I think, is so important.
Oh yeah, especially in the this stage of life,
Yes.
perimenopause and
Oh
beyond.
yes.
Okay, so to wrap it up, what are your top three tips or strategies to help us sleep better?
Yeah, so number one, I would say get natural daylight exposure within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up. And preferably that would be going outside. If you're able to walk for about 10 minutes, that's even better because you're getting movement too. But do yourself a favor and leave your sunglasses at home,
Mhm.
because the sunglasses prevent the natural light from hitting your eyes. And so when the natural light hits your eyes, it sends a signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your circadian pacemaker, which basically gives you this sort of cascade of neurotransmitter and hormone releases that help boost cortisol for the day, boost serotonin, shut down any residual melatonin from the night before, and actually then prepare the melatonin for the following night. So a bunch of beautiful things happen. So leave your sunglasses at home. The second thing I would say would be pick a consistent wake time that you can stick to every day, even the weekends, because having that anchored wake up time really strengthens our circadian rhythm. And we find that also when you have that fixed wake up time, you become sleepy around the same time each night. So then it just sort of self-regulates your sleep wake cycle. And then lastly, I would say exercise. They've done like a meta-analysis on 13 studies showing that exercise helps older adults with deep, or, middle-aged to older adults with deep sleep. We know that exercise helps us with our sleep latency, the time it takes to fall asleep, our sleep efficiency, our quality. And you don't need to go hard at it. It just, what they're saying is moderate exercise can be helpful. So you don't need to do a HIIT class every day, but keeping active and being mindful of your activity level is important, because that activity level builds up your adenosine, your sleepy chemicals. So you just become, a better sleeper overall when you are doing that regular exercise.
Yes, I agree. I agree with it all. Well, thank you, Morgan. This was awesome. So much really great information. So where can women find more about you?
Yeah, so they can visit my website, morganadamswellness.com. I have that free mini course. I have a course called Midlife Sleep School for women. And there's also the opportunity to set up what I call a sleep clarity call, which is basically a 20-minute consultation with me. If you're struggling with your sleep and you're sort of thinking that you might want the next level of help, that I'm there for that. And then, of course, where we met, Instagram, morganadams.wellness. I post a lot of content. DM me, say hi, don't be a stranger. I love talking about sleep. So
Yeah, I love your Instagram. I don't follow that many people on there just because it's so much conflicting and overwhelming
yeah,
information, but I love what you share on there. And it kind of made me even rethink sleep, like I said, because there were times where I would put so much judgment on it, like the amount of time and all that. And even just like you talking about the different sleep cycles throughout the night, it's just a nice perspective shift. So thank you for that.
thank you.
Yeah, we will link to everything in the show notes. So make sure you check Morgan out. Thank you again so much for being here today.
Thank you, Claudia.
All right. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not, nor do I act as a doctor or any other medical professional. I am not providing healthcare, medical services, or attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure any physical, mental, or emotional disease or condition. The information shared is not intended to be a substitute for the professional medical advice provided by your own medical or mental health provider.